Good afternoon, sir. This afternoon we're going to hear from Mr. Railton.
Yes.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you give your full name, please?
My name is Nigel Railton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Railton. You should have in front of you a witness statement
I do.
dated the 30th of August of this year. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Could I ask you please to turn to the final substantive page, that's page 33. Can you confirm that that is your signature?
It is my signature.
And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
That witness statement has a URN of WITN 113-90100, and that will be published on the inquiry's website shortly. By way of background, you are a qualified accountant, is that correct?
Yes.
You started working life in the railway industry, is that right?
Yes.
You worked at Black & Decker and then Daewoo Cars.
That's correct.
You joined Camelot in 1998 as head of finance.
Correct.
And you held various positions at Camelot before becoming their CEO from 2017 to 2023. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
You currently hold a number of non-executive director positions, as well as being chair of something called Argentex Group, which is a financial services company. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Relevant for today's purpose, you are current chair of the Post Office, or interim chair of the Post Office, and you were appointed on the 24th of March of this year. Is that correct? Sorry, 24th of May this year.
24th of May is correct, yes.
In terms of your appointment, you've set out in your witness statement that you were approached by the then Minister Hollinrake in February of this year. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
And then you were formally appointed by the then Secretary of State Badenoch.
Yes.
Did you know either the Minister or the Secretary of State?
No, I did not.
Do you know why you were approached?
I don't know why I was approached. I imagine because of my experience at Camelot.
Did you work with their department when you were at Camelot?
No, it was a different department. Camelot, the National Lottery, is governed by DCMS, so a different department.
Do you know if it was a competitive process? Were there interviews or anything along those lines?
I do not.
No. Did you have to submit a CV or?
Yes, I had to submit a CV. I must say, whether it was an interview or the amount of meetings I had many, many meetings with Department of Business and Trade, UK Government Investments, the Postmaster NEDs, so lots and lots and lots of meetings.
Prior to your appointment?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you know if it was or is expected to become a permanent position?
I don't know. I mean, clearly the Post Office needs a chairman, and I've not had any conversations yet about whether this, when a permanent chairman will be put in place.
Have you been told how long it's expected to be an interim position?
Yes, it was 12 months from the 24th of May to the 24th of May next year.
Thank you. To what extent, so far as you're aware, was your IT experience at Camelot relevant to your appointment?
I don't think it was, actually. I'm not sure.
Was there something in particular that you achieved at Camelot that you consider was important for this particular role?
Well, I think, the National Lottery operates at an enormous scale. 44,000 retailers, systems that have to balance to the penny every day, operate with absolute integrity. And we changed the systems in the UK a couple of times and in other markets. So I think the size of the challenge in terms of the Horizon replacement for the Post Office in particular, I think my experience was relevant and is relevant.
In terms of the composition of the Camelot board and comparing that to the Post Office board, do you consider on joining the Post Office that there is sufficient relevant expertise amongst board members?
I think there's some very good board members. I think the board members we have are excellent, actually. But there are some gaps. And we've just finished doing a board skills matrix assessment. And there are clear gaps in technology, There is no expertise on the board in terms of technology. There's no expertise in the board in terms of business transformation. And also, I think we're lacking in kind of civil service stroke government expertise.
And can you assist us with what steps are being taken to fill those gaps?
Yes, we're actively recruiting now. We've had a number of applications for the technology role and the business transformation role. In fact, we had about 150 applications for the technology role. So it's proving popular.
Was that something that you implemented, that you identified and came up with a solution, or was that something that was already in train?
No, I think conversations were happening at the board in terms of the skills that were missing, but it's something that I implemented.
One thing that you have said in your witness statement is that when people join the board, they discover it involves a lot more work than anticipated. Is that just because of the inquiry and the historic matters, or do you see that as a broader issue?
I think it's a broader issue. I think the governance within the company is not working as effectively as it could. So I think too many matters, quite frankly, go to the board. I think too many matters go to non-executive directors to deal with on a virtual daily basis, particularly around people. But I do think it's temporary.
I think you've said that you were told that it was going to be a 2-day-a-week position to be chair. Realistically, how long do you spend in that role?
Much more than that. I'd say 5 days a week. Not constantly 5 days a week, but pretty much the equivalent of 5 days a week.
Is that sustainable?
It is for the short term, yes.
And when do you envisage the workload will reduce?
I think the key event is the implementation of the strategic review that we're doing now, number one. And number two, when we fully implement the recommendations from the Grant Thornton report and have the governance within the board and the company operating effectively and efficiently.
And how long do you imagine that's going to take?
Hopefully about 3 months.
3 months. Thank you. I'd like to start by looking at the briefings that you received on becoming chair. Could we please bring up onto screen your witness statement? That's WITN 113-90100. If we could start, please, on page 5, the bottom of page 5. Thank you. If we scroll down, thank you. If we could continue scrolling over the page, please. We see there in paragraph 12 at the bottom, you say in terms of the Horizon system, sorry, if we scroll down slightly more, you say, my understanding is that the same technical issues and concerns, the ones that happened in the past, do not apply to the current build. And paragraph 13, you say, I had a session with the Post Office technical teams as part of my induction. This covered the Post Office's IT system at enterprise architecture level. I asked several questions about Horizon and associated business processes and controls and came away assured that what has happened in the past in the IT system cannot happen now. Can you assist us with who provided you with these briefings?
It was Simon, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the names. It was a former CTO and senior members of the technical team. Forgive me, I can't think of the names. Chris Brocklesby and his team, effectively.
Thank you. Could we please bring onto screen our YouGov expert report? That's EXPG 607. And could we turn to page 19, please? You're aware of the circumstances of the YouGov report and how we obtain the results?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Current sub-postmasters were questioned, and these are their responses with regards to issues that they've experienced with Horizon in the last 12 months. 70% experienced screen freezes, 68% loss of connection, 61% issue with pin pad, 57% experienced unexplained discrepancies. If we please turn to page 28. We see their frequency of experiencing an unexplained discrepancy since January 2020. And we see 17% experienced unexplained discrepancies a few times a month, 18% at least once a month, 21% once every 2 to 3 months. If we turn over the page, please, we can see how discrepancies have been resolved, and 74% of those who had experienced discrepancies said that they resolved those discrepancies themselves or using their branch's own money. In light of those findings, do you think that you have been properly briefed about the current state of the Horizon system?
The briefing I had, by its very nature, was very high level, very high level. And we continue to look, and the team continue to look at discrepancies in particular and the operation of Horizon. The Horizon system is available 100% of the time. This gets reported to the board. The number of defects is quite low now, I'm told, through the data we get at the board. And I was under the impression that the dispute resolution button now was dealing with most issues, but clearly this data doesn't support that. What we want to do and what we will do is now work through the dispute resolution process and the end-to-end process of how these discrepancies are arising, because I think it's a function of three things. It's a function of the system, of cash, and of stock. And I think we need to look at it end-to-end rather than just looking at the system. And Neil Brocklehurst, who's now the acting CEO, we have talked about that. We want to do that with postmasters.
Do you feel that the current experience of sub-postmasters in using the Horizon system is properly understood at those levels within the business?
I don't know.
Has there been a discussion about this report and the results?
Yes, we've talked, well, the executive team have talked about these results. And clearly, I think two things spring out from the results. It's really disappointing that this is still happening, and somewhat surprising. But what it does do, it allows us to now take these findings and look at them in the context of the strategic review that we're finishing and make sure that the plan we're coming up with addresses them. And also, of course, resetting the NBIT programme.
And we'll get to the NBIT programme, but looking back at your witness statement again, and it says, my understanding is that the same technical issues and concerns do not apply to the current build. And we saw on screen there all of those similar issues to the ones that we heard about during the human impact hearings and during other stages of this inquiry. Do you think that the business has a sufficient grip on those issues?
Well, I think the issues that were on one of the previous slides about screen freezes, and systems do freeze from time to time, and systems do have issues. The important thing is making sure the control environment is adequate to deal with issues as they arise, and that the technical teams have got the proper controls and support around them.
And if we turn back, please, to page 19, it wasn't just screen freezes. Unexplained discrepancies, 57%. That seems like quite a high proportion of sub-postmasters experiencing not just discrepancies, but unexplained discrepancies. Do you think the business has a sufficient understanding of those kinds of issues?
Based on that, 57% no.
Your predecessor, Mr. Staunton's evidence was to the effect that problems with Horizon were obvious to him when he started. Is that a conversation that you've had with Mr. Staunton at all?
No, I've not spoken to him at all.
Moving on to the issue of strategy. Strategy is something that is mentioned in your witness statement 23 times. It sounds great, but can you assist us with what it actually means?
Of course. When I was doing my due diligence before accepting to become interim chairman, it became very obvious to me that there was no strategy for the post office at all, and there hadn't been for a number of years. And I think that's one of many problems, but one of the big problems that's causing a lack of direction in the organisation. So one of my preconditions with the former Secretary of State is that if I did agree to join, if she wanted me to join, is that I was able to conduct a thorough strategic review to look at the future of the business. And in doing a strategic review, you look at all elements of the business. And over the last 4 months, we've done that. And last week, the board signed off a plan for the future for the post office, but more fundamentally for postmasters. And we've passed that plan to the government now for review and approval.
If we could please turn to poll 00448-624. This is a meeting of the Board of Directors, 4th of June 2024, but it's actually a document within this pack that I'd like to take you to. It's page 109. Thank you. Is this where things began in terms of developing a strategy?
Yes.
It is a firm called Tenio that was instructed by the Post Office. Were you involved in instructing Tenio?
Yes.
Why Tenio?
I'd worked with Teneo in the past as part of the turnaround of Camelot and the National Lottery in 2017. I was very impressed with them in terms of their ability to get to grips with things pretty quickly. And I thought that these would be an ideal company to help us to pull a plan together for the future.
We've seen in the inquiry, especially in recent years, a large number of external reviews and reports. We've seen Grant Thornton, Ernst & Young, Accenture, now Tenio. Why do you think Tenio is the one that's going to work?
Well, I said I'd worked with them before on a number of occasions, actually. And the quality of the individuals they offered to work on this was really high. And again, you know, we've now finished the review. We've now got the plan, and I can assure this inquiry that the quality of the plan is very, very high, in my opinion.
I think you've said you've handed it over to government, the final review, or final plan. Is that a Tenio document or a Post Office document?
It's a Post Office plan. So the Post Office team worked with Teneo to come up with a plan.
Will there be a version of that plan that you can share with the inquiry in due course?
Yes, of course. If the inquiry wants to see it, then it will be provided through the normal channels.
So just to check I've got it right, the Post Office Board has now approved a strategic review, plan, sorry.
Plan. Yeah,
plan.
That's
right.
correct, Win, yes.
The next step is for the shareholder to approve it.
Yes.
And what is your expectation about the timescale over that process?
I've been pleasantly surprised at how quickly the government are reacting to this.
Right.
I anticipate, but can't commit to, getting a decision in a week or two.
Right. Okay.
As at today, is there any aspect, even as high level as you like, that you're able to share with the inquiry in respect of overall strategy and direction of the Post Office?
Yes. My going-in hypothesis to this whole review was that we needed to do two things. We needed a new deal for postmasters, not just economically, but in terms of operationally. And secondly, we needed to reverse the polarity of the Post Office. And what I mean by that is to put the postmasters at the centre, not the current centre being at the centre, with the current centre actually becoming, if you like, a service function properly to the postmasters. And as I say, I can't go into the detail because it's subject to government approval and is commercially sensitive because it affects colleagues. But what I can tell you is that we have achieved those two objectives through the plan. New deal for postmasters and a change in the polarity.
I'd like to take you through a number of other reports that have been obtained in recent years, or reviews or exercises, and to get your view as to whether they've been addressed or not. The first I'd like to bring onto screen is poll 00448-681. And these are exit interviews that occurred before you took up your role. These were exit interviews, and the information was gathered, I think, by Ernst & Young. It says confidential for the attention of the chairman and the GCPO. Is this a document that you have received before being provided with it by the inquiry?
No.
we'll go through some of the detail, but is some of the detail information that was provided to you before this document was provided to you by the inquiry?
I can't recall. I did read this document yesterday when I received it, so I'm able to offer views on it if you would like.
Non-executive director exit interviews. The following summary is the result of 3 interviews carried out virtually on the 1st of March 2023, so some time before you joined the company. The 3 interviewees were Carla Stent, Zarin Patel and Lisa Harrington, who have been in as post office non-executive role for between 3 and 7 years. Could we turn over the page, please? I'd just like to test this alongside your own personal impression on joining the company. Leadership and teamwork culture. The results from their exit interviews are summarised as follows. There are questions on how well set up the group executive leadership team are for the business turnaround. Specifically, questions were raised about their capability, the teamwork, and the interactions with the board/non-executive directors. Notwithstanding the external pressures and constraints, governmental changes, politics, shareholders, and competitor landscape, etc., there was a strong suggestion that levels of respect, trust, and enterprise-first thinking within the group executive and also between the board and the group executive are a barrier to business success that warrants further exploration. Is that something that you have experienced since joining the company?
Not exactly. I think the group executive, was quite thin on the ground when I joined. We had no CFO because the former CFO was on long-term sick, no general counsel. So quite large gaps in the team, but that's not something I particularly recognise.
The second paragraph is explained. I think that's a reference to Mr. Cameron. The third paragraph, with the context of the current inquiry especially, there was a clear concern over whether lessons had or were being learned and applied to prevent something similar happening in the future. Concerns were clear about the lack of time/energy that leaders had, but also the apparent underlying lack of trust/respect between leaders and the lack of accountability, healthy support and challenge. Again, is that something that you have come across?
I've certainly come across the lack of accountability.
And can you give us an example of that, please?
I don't think I can give specific examples, but it's just a theme that I'm seeing. And the way I'm seeing it manifest itself is with the amount of materials that are going to the board. So I've listened to other witnesses give evidence and I think talk about the board being overwhelmed with information. And that's something certainly that I saw immediately. And I think the reason that ties into accountability is people are not making decisions and are deflecting everything upwards through the governance structures in the organisation till that lands at the board.
Thank you. Could we go over the page, please? And over the page again. Can we go to number 3, please? Feedback there is the board is not really listened to. The exec is under real pressure and it's not sure they know how to get the most out of the non-executive directors. There's not enough clarity on the role and expectations of the non-executive directors/board. Slightly further down, it says, I'm not sure we have the right calibre of team at executive level and therefore there's more chance the non-executive director gets involved in detail which they shouldn't. Turnarounds need stronger leaders and leadership with courage, energy, and will drive change and who can help the organisation believe. What are your views on that? Have you experienced any of those concerns?
I think it's part of the same issue. And when we talk about turnarounds, I think what we're talking about now is implementation of the new plan that comes from the strategic review. And clearly you need strong leaders with great leadership abilities. The thing that we need to do is once we've had the strategic review hopefully approved, we'll look at the skills that are required to implement that. We have an interim team at the moment that are strong. and we will consider what permanent roles we need in order to implement the plan. But I do think the relationship between the non-executive directors and the executives, certainly in the few months I've been here, is quite healthy.
Number 4 relates to the board being risk averse. If we scroll down, it also says it feels as though we're a bit of a rubber stamp on things. Can you assist us with your views on that?
Well, I don't think the board is risk averse. I think the board does its role properly in terms of considering risks appropriately. If the rubber stamp relates to how we work with government departments, then I can assure you I will not work in that way. I'm an independent chairman and we will operate as an independent board.
Have you taken any steps so far that can demonstrate that?
Yes, with the strategic review, where suggestions were made that we might want to not go be quite so aggressive with the strategic review in terms of the things we wanted to implement. And I refused to concede and said, no, we're going to, as an independent board, come up with a plan that we think is the right plan for the post office.
What do you mean by suggestions were made?
Just in terms of the level of funding that's required.
Who by?
It was just by officials that I spoke to in different departments in government. And it wasn't official direction, let me be clear. This was just suggestions, because I think a lot of decisions are driven by what the Treasury will fund. So what one tends to get is advice in terms of what the Treasury might accept. But I'm not prepared to do that. I mean, the thing is, my remit and our remit is to come up with the right plan for postmasters, for a new deal, and to reset the, and to change the polarisation. So I couldn't do that if I'm hampered. So we've come up with the right, I believe, is the right plan.
We've heard some evidence of a begging bowl mentality whereby the post office have to beg the Treasury for money to achieve any change or to achieve anything that they want to achieve. Is that your experience?
Not exactly. I think all of these examples of Treasury short-term funding all come from the same problem, lack of strategy. So because things have been short-term, each decision has been a short-term decision, it's therefore necessitated short-term funding from the Treasury. And I don't know which one started first, whether it was the Treasury saying you can only have money for 3 months, in which case short-term decisions are made, or in fact short-term decisions were made that led to the Treasury funding it short-term. But what I do know is the antidote to this is a proper strategy that is properly considered, funded and implemented.
And you don't have to give us the figures involved, but does the strategy that you're going to be presenting or you have presented, does that have a figure in mind that will resolve the various issues?
Yes, it's fully costed, it's fully planned out. We know exactly what we need to do.
Thank you. Number 5, overall, the variety of reasons, capability, energy, the leadership probably isn't strong enough for the demands the organisation is facing. Nick and the exec are the fixers, not the cause of the Horizon situation, but his and their ability to remain rational and focused is really being tested by his or their attachment to the serious nature of the historical issues, and this is depleting energy and bandwidth for the transformations. The board and exec need to be better at supporting each other. The level of teamwork is poor. The public inquiry process is consuming and draining the group executives' energy needed for the turnaround. Be really clear and aligned on the messages for the shareholder regarding the challenges ahead. Do you consider that there is sufficient energy currently to achieve those objectives?
Yes, I think so. I think the interim people that were brought in recently have injected new energy into the business.
Where have they been brought into?
Well, three individuals came from my team at Camelot, and Preetha, who's with us today, came from John Lewis and Heathrow Airport.
Thank you. There's a genuine concern that the board are held accountable for stuff we don't actually have the authority to decide on. Having learned from the postmaster non-executive directors, it shows how out of touch our execs are. They're not as connected enough to the commercials and definitely not in touch with the customer. In your view, Is the role of non-executive sub-postmaster something that you would wish to continue? Do you think it's useful, or do you think some other model might be appropriate?
I think, and answer your question, absolutely vital. One of the reasons that I agreed to join was the conversations I'd had with Saf and Elliot. And in particular, I had an amazing conversation with them for an hour, and they asked for my help based on my Camelot experience, which was one of the real reasons that I joined.
Could we scroll down, please? It says there's no obvious successor to Nick other than DCIO. I'm not sure who that is, but it says, but he is far too stretched and needs to focus on the platform. For the next 12 months, there's a need for someone who will perform a CEO business as usual role, COO/CEO designate. Given much of Nick's focus and time will be spent on the inquiry, there are some warning lights around the way work is proceeding on the new platform. We'll get on to the new platform.
Yes.
In terms of the CEO role, we know that Mr. Reid is going to be stepping down. Are you involved in succession planning?
I will be.
Do you know if anything has taken place so far in that regard?
No, not yet. I need to, once this evidence session is over, I need to turn my attention to speaking to UKGI and DBT to start that process.
And irrespective of names, what kind of skills are you going to be looking for?
I think the skills that we need are the ones that are going to be determined by the strategic review. I think we need people with strong leadership teams, understand how to work with an organisation that supports an amazing social purpose, digital skills, retail skills, and technology skills. So quite a broad remit.
Do you think such a person, A, exists, and B, would be happy to join the post office at the level of pay?
Yes, and yes.
Could we scroll down to number 9, please? What advice would you want to share with the chairman? Complete a great handover involving new and outgoing non-executive directors and extending to the other board members. Give clear and frank messages to the shareholder to help everyone, internally and externally, appreciate the situation post office is in and the ambition moving forwards. Be decisive over the team. Have we got the right CEO for turnaround? Are there too many non-executive directors? There doesn't feel enough camaraderie on the board. What is your view about the balance between executives and non-executives at board level?
Well, we have no, apart from Nick, who has resigned, we have no executive directors on the board at the moment. So that's something we need to address. So we need the CFO to be a board member and the acting CEO, and that's something we're actively doing at the moment.
Could we scroll down, please, to number 11? Given that the post office is in need of sustained transformation commercially and culturally, so it is set up to compete and be successful in the market, there are questions about the fit of the board level group executive leadership. How well suited are they to drive the turnaround? Much the same as we've already been looking at.
Yes.
There's a concern there raised between the relationship between Mr. Reid and Mr. Cameron. Do you think there is sufficient trust at executive level and board level in the organisation?
It's difficult for me to answer that question, given I've only been here a number of months, but certainly at board level, I found a really high level of trust between board members.
Thank you. The second document I'd like to look at is something called Group Assurance Chairman Update. That can be found at poll 00460606. This document is dated the 16th of May of this year, so it predates your appointment or your formal appointment, but you are listed as an attendee of this meeting. It's poll 00460606. Thank you. Are you able to assist us with a background to this document?
Yes, I was. Even though my official appointment was the 24th of May, I did start on the 1st of May with my induction. And I have to say, I had a very comprehensive induction programme that I worked through with the teams. And this one was on the 16th of May, which was my introduction to Sarah and Anshu to take me through how assurance worked.
Could we scroll down and look at paragraph 4? It says there, adopted a tactical and heavily manual approach to assurance due to the following gaps. A, no common universe definition and or coverage for post office activities. It says even IA do not have a comprehensive universe and they were not assessing the sustainability and or impacts of the actions implemented for issued judgments, a major cause of divergence between their outcome and ours. SNOW, our GRC tool, cannot be relied upon for completeness and or accuracy with a lens of both risks and controls. This view has been communicated to both RCC and ARC. And then it says, so what? We had no choice to build our own Excel-based universes, common issues judgment, 365 lines, SPMP integrated assurance and risk universe, 509 lines. Am I right to understand from this that as part of their group assurance function, they were reviewing, for example, the implementation of the common issues judgment and had to do that on an Excel document?
I believe that's what the document says, yes. This was, as you could quite imagine, quite a lot of detail for an incoming chairman to absorb in a couple of weeks.
Stepping back and just trying to remember that meeting, what were the key concerns that were raised at this meeting?
I think more generally that the kind of control universe or the control framework within the post office was perhaps not as efficient as it could be. And what I mean by that is that assurance, risk and compliance were all separate, as was audit. And it seemed to me that things were operating in silos and it'd be much better to put some things together to get a common view of how the control framework should work.
If we scroll over the page, they set out their key issues and significant concerns. They say all of these are easily fixable. One is lack of accountability and consequent management. This is the single root cause of all issues at the post office. Is that something you agree with? Is that something that's been taken forward?
I think I agree with it, actually. I think I said earlier there was a lack of accountability. I think there was a lack of consequence management. And the reason I say that is when I look at some of the risks that come to the Audit and Risk Committee that are moving quarter by quarter and not being resolved or move forward, I think that's an example.
So the risks are being identified at board level but aren't being resolved. Why is that?
I think no, the risks are being identified within the business and escalated through the Audit Committee to the board. And previously, they were not moving at sufficient pace in terms of mitigation and resolution. The reason for that is the sheer volume of priorities in the business at the moment.
And can you see that being resolved, and if so, how?
Well, focus on the key priorities, number one. I think we're now very clear on what the key priorities of the business are. Would it be helpful to describe those?
Yes, briefly.
Well, I think, quite clearly, there's two number one priorities. One is assisting this inquiry with its important work, and the second one is speeding up mediation payments. Our third priority is the strategic review, having that approved by government, implementing it as soon as possible. Fourthly, implementing the findings from the Grant Thornton review in terms of governance. That's something I'm hoping to have in place very quickly. And then finally, deciding what to do next with the NBIT programme. There are kind of 5 priorities.
Thank you. We'll just go through a few more of these key issues and then we'll move actually on to the Grant Thornton report and your reflections on that. The second is closed mindset, capability and competence. Lessons of the past at an inherent level are not imbibed in the DNA of the post office. Many seniors have a myopic lens on their role Many are afraid to make decisions, therefore so many committees. Newly created leadership team has excluded line of defence, most illogical considering lessons of the past and themes arising from the inquiry. Can you assist us with your understanding of that and whether that is being resolved?
It is being resolved. I have to be honest, I don't quite understand some of that. The one I certainly recognise is that many in the business are afraid to make decisions. There is a fear culture, and basically what that means in practice is that many decisions are escalated and eventually arrive at the board.
And I think we see that under governance, number 3. I think the third point there says, despite the Post Office significant issues, board/ARC seem afraid to intervene or challenge overtly for management to course correct. Does that feed into that concern, or is that a separate concern?
No, it's part of the same concern where too much is coming to the board. And I can assure you that I am course correcting that.
And then operational level, it says disparate, illogical and non-existent versus good or even basic practice. A responsible person is not a subject matter expert in this field. We have already heard evidence this morning about a problem within the business where subject matter, those who were being asked for their opinions were not the subject matter experts, and perhaps a lack of subject matter experts being asked their views. Is that something you recognise?
Not particularly. I think context is important. So I'd imagine at a executive level, asking non-subject matter expert their opinion on things is sometimes healthy because you get good debate. So it's not something I particularly see.
Thank you. Let's move on to the Grant Thornton review, please. You've said in your statement, and you've said just now, that there is a structured programme to implement their recommendations. Can you assist us with what that involves and who's responsible for that?
The company secretary is working through that at the moment. So as a board, we agreed a plan. So with all the actions in the Grant Thornton review, and of course there are many, we have a plan to implement all of those things, and we're working through that. Some of which we can implement before the strategic review is agreed, and some afterwards. So the ones that we can kind of get on with. And by the way, what I should say is that I thought the Grant Thornton report was excellent. I mean, it's all pretty much basic good governance, but it was excellent in terms of its detail. So we're implementing everything we can, and then those things that need to wait for the strategic review to be approved, we'll implement immediately afterwards.
Thank you. Could we please turn to poll 004464777, and that's the Grant Thornton report. The key findings are on page 7, and perhaps we could turn to those, please. The first one, the lack of a unifying purpose and group-wide strategy between the Post Office and its shareholder. Is the strategic review the solution to that?
Yes.
Second, is there anything else other than the strategic review that you would point to address that issue?
No, but I think what the strategic review allows us to do is to have a proper conversation with the government departments to how the relationship should work. But at least we have a strategy as a start point for the conversation.
Number 2, conflict around the role of the shareholder versus the board. That's one area that we've heard quite a lot of evidence on, the relationship between the board and UKGI and the Department for Business. What do you see as the board doing in respect of conflicts in that relationship?
I haven't particularly seen this, but that may be because of the approach that I've taken, that we are an independent board and we will make our decisions with input from board members that represent the shareholder, but we'll make our independent decisions nonetheless. So I haven't really seen it. I think I can understand from history where this might have arisen. But again, I think the answer to this is to have a clear strategy agreed with government.
How do you see cultural issues being addressed between the UKGI and the Post Office?
I don't currently see cultural issues, actually. I think what we have to get to is a common goal, which is a new deal for postmasters that I talked about. And we have been working through achieving that common goal. And I have to say that I feel supported.
In your view, does the role of a UKGI non-executive director, does that work on the board? So somebody who, for example, spends all of their time on the post office, has greater knowledge of post office affairs than perhaps other non-executive directors?
I think it depends on the individual. I think it can work. I think with the wrong individual, it might be difficult. But certainly from my experience, I think it works. And it's not unusual. I mean, when I was at Camelot, we had shareholder representatives on the board that 100% owned the company, and we made it work. And if you embrace it properly, you can really make it, turn it into your advantage in terms of having somebody who can go back to the shareholder that really understands the business requirements.
Number 3, leadership capacity. Are there any specific plans in place that you can point to address that?
Yes. So structure follows strategy. So once the strategy is approved, we have a clear structure that we're going to populate with clear skills that are required.
Can you assist us with what that means in plain English, please?
Well, in plain English, we understand what the structure is trying to achieve, the strategy is trying to achieve. We will need an organisation structure to support that and an operating model. So, what roles do we need? Clearly, we need a CEO. Clearly, we need a CFO. But what other types of roles and what types of individuals and what types of experience will we need? And we'll populate that as the start point of implementing the plan with the revised operating model of how the business has to operate.
Are there likely to be more people recruited to senior roles?
Possibly. And if I can just clarify that, it depends on the definition of senior role. Do we need perhaps more people at an executive level? Probably. But there are lots of layers of senior roles in the post office, and I think that's unusual.
So it's unusual for there to be so many people in senior positions?
Yes.
Thank you. Number 4, decision-making forums at enterprise level lack pace and do not enable accountability. Have there been any changes insofar as that is concerned, as far as you're aware?
Well, this is something that I'm, and the executive are currently looking at as part of the whole governance redesign. We have to re-engineer the governance to make sure the business, first of all, is taking accountability and has the right decision-making ability, and making sure the various levels of governance work, which currently at the moment, to be frank, they don't, because too much comes to the board.
5th, culture, a lack of trust, accountability and performance management. How do you envisage that can be overcome?
I think culture is a really interesting topic, and I know one that this inquiry is considered from various different dimensions, but I think it starts with purpose. And I think that, can the culture be improved in the post office by doing certain things better? And I think Karen this morning talked about some of the things that she's doing, yes, but to get a true step change in culture requires a resetting of the purpose, which again the strategic review does. And I think a reset in the purpose allows us then to get the right behaviours in place, and culture will follow.
And what is that purpose, so far as you see it?
Just the social value. The purpose of the centre of the post office is to support postmasters, to support the communities that they serve.
And in your view, knowing what you know from the past, do you think that there has been or is about to be some sort of step change in that?
There will be a step change. There will be a step change, but it'll be through the strategic review when we reposition change the polarity of the business and go back to first principles around purpose. And I did this at Camelot. When I took over CEO at Camelot, belief in the executive team was 35%, which is not dissimilar actually to the scores we've seen for the post office, at 36%, I think. When I left, assisted by some of the people that are currently assisting me at the post office, it was at 96.
How do you see yourself as achieving that?
Pardon me?
How do you see yourself as achieving that?
I think it's the same steps. It's about having a plan that goes back to the purpose of the post office, and a new deal for postmasters, changing polarity, having the right people operating in the right way, behaving in the right way, to the right values, culture follows.
Are there any concrete steps outside of your own strategic review that you can draw to the attention of the chair that you consider would change the culture in the post office?
I know that the executive team at the moment are working hard to try and change the culture, and I think incremental changes can be made, where people start to put, people do, many conversations I hear about postmasters, so that's a good thing. But I think rather than just incremental change, I think we need wholesale change, and that will come through the strategic review.
I'm getting quite a few answers that are just looking forward to the strategic review. It would be helpful for the inquiry to know at least some steps that you have in mind to change something so fundamental as culture.
I can't really tell you the things I'll do in the next month or two because I'm the chairman and it's really a role for the executive, but I know that Neil Brocklehurst and the executive team and Karen are focused on this. So I think, yes, we can change the culture and perhaps we can change behaviours in the short term. What I'm talking about is truly embedded culture. That's what I'm really talking about. Will only come through the step change that's allowed through the strategic review.
Are we to expect something fundamental to change as a result of the strategic review?
Yes.
Thank you. The fourth document I'd like to ask you about is an anonymous letter that we've seen already today. It's poll 00448519. Was this a letter that came to you very early on in your time at the post office? Is it a letter you saw?
Yes.
Yes. I won't go through it again. If we turn over the page, we can just see there's something addressed to you, penultimate paragraph that says, Mr. Railton, please look at the above and investigate. If you can, you should engage with some of the past employees, particularly Mr. Staunton and Mr. Cameron. Our view is that those who have left under a cloud are the ones telling the truth. Is that something that you've personally investigated? Are there conversations that you have had?
I haven't spoken to Mr. Staunton or Mr. Cameron, no. When I received this letter, and I think it was dated 4 days after I officially started, I took advice from the SID, and I went through this and stepped through it because I thought it was also a useful learning experience for me to understand what happened in the past. I was assured, and we put it into the proper investigation process. What came back was that the vast majority of all of these claims had already been investigated. And there was one or two that required a bit more investigation, which happened very quickly and through the proper process. And this basically included no further action.
Thank you. That can come down. I'd like to now move on to the topic of NBIT. You've said in your statement, and it's a paragraph we've already been over, that you have been told that what has happened in the past in the IT system can't happen again now. Are you familiar with the inquiry's hearings in phase 2 of the inquiry that looked at the original procurement of the Horizon system?
I'm not, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
Could we please turn to poll 00460593? This is an email from Mr. Bartlett to yourself, dated the 27th of June of this year. It'll come up on the screen in a moment. And I'd just like to take you through, he's identified a number of different investigations that at that point in time were ongoing relating to the NBIT system. And I'd like to take you through each one of those. Before I do, what were you told initially about the progress of the NBIT scheme?
As part of my induction, I was told that the programme was on track and progressing well. I struggled to reconcile that to another briefing I'd had, that the project was now going to cost 1.2 billion against a budget of 180 million, and deliver in 2028 against an expectation of 2024. So the two things are in conflict for me.
And why do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't know. I think perhaps it was people were confident about the revised plan, whereas my reference point was the original plan. So perhaps that was the reason for the improved confidence in the revised plan.
Do you think you were being given correct information initially?
It's very difficult to assess because I was really new and I was presented with a lot of data and a lot of information. So it's difficult for me to answer that question. I imagine people were presenting me with the data they thought was relevant.
I'll just have a read through this and I'll take you through each of the allegations. Mr. Bartlett says, Nigel, when Sarah and I met with you to brief you on A&CI's work, we discussed Project Willow 2 and the Speak Up reporting we have periodically received over the last year. It gave us a qualified insight into the NBIT programme. You asked for a brief on the topics being reported to us. Claire Hamilton, the Speak Up team manager, has helpfully prepared the below, which I hope is a useful summary. Willow 2. This is a two-strand substantive investigation relating to the concerns raised by multiple Speak Up reporters concerning NBIT. Pinson Mason and Grant Thornton have been commissioned by the Post Office to investigate these two allegations. Allegation 1, that certain Post Office staff were aware of problems with the NBIT system and that progress reports to senior stakeholders, including Nick and the group executive, may not have been reliable. In April 2024, further information received in relation to the upward passing of information and decision-making at senior level in respect to known errors in the NBIT system. It is to be determined if high-severity defect information that was channeled upwards in an email to Steerco prior to rollout may have been deliberately misleading. Are you able to assist us with the status of that investigation at all?
I'm not. I'm afraid I'm not.
Allegation 2, that two senior engineers pressured two IT security / assurance personnel to disable or waive InfoSec checks in NBIT specifications to save time in the project's rollout. Comment, Grant Thornton are focusing on evidencing / testing this and understanding the specific impact if it did occur. So it seems that the second allegation is that something was disabled in order to save time. Something in...
I think both of these investigations are ongoing, but certainly what I'll also say is that these allegations raise my interest in whether or not the programme and the project was going in the right direction.
I mean, this is June of this year. Have you been provided with a substantive update in relation to any of these projects, any of these investigations?
No.
Is that of concern to you?
Perhaps it should be, but I've been more concerned with making sure we understand what's happening with the project. And I think some of these things perhaps explain why the project is overspent and late, but I haven't chased up on the progress against the allegations, but I will after this session.
General concerns relating to NBIT team / activity raised via Speak Up. The following are grouped themes of various information passed by a variety of reporters to Speak Up over the last year that discusses NBIT. Behaviours. Behaviours and activities were driven by timescales linked to bonuses rather than delivery of quality and reliability, i.e. perverse incentives. Comments, this is now several months old, so unsure if this is still occurring, but it is collaborated in the Willow 2 investigation. 2, mirroring very senior staff behaviour, Stravko and Gareth Clark. There was poor or lack of effective communication between key staff around governance of the programme. 3rd, active discouragement by senior NBIT staff relating to the use of Speak Up channels. Comment 1 allegation was made relating to detriment resulting from Speak Up, an offence under the PIDA if proved. This was investigated and no grounds found to support the concern. So there seems to be a result in relation to the final bullet point, but in relation to those first two, are you aware of any results from those investigations?
I am not at this stage, no.
If we scroll down, Accenture, collective confidential reports received raising concerns/issues about Accenture and conflicts of director warding by CB. That's Mr. Brocklesby, sorry. With CB being ex-Accenture, without anyone looking at the bigger mapping picture of key positions, activity held, performance by Accenture. Are you aware of any developments in that regard?
It's all part of our review. I think we are too reliant on Accenture.
And I think this possibly feeds into the final section. If we scroll down, there's a section there on reliance on third parties generally. Need to be setting the conditions for the post office to be ready to run the system once rolled out, which includes post office staff gaining relevant skills, understanding and knowledge during the design and build programme. Concerns are being raised that the post office has become reliant on third parties, and so post office staff are not going to be able to effectively take over during the end transition. The matter of cost of third parties is also being raised as a significant concern. This is being compared to the NHS being reliant on locum staff, therefore not having the monies to continue as business as usual. Is this something that you received an update on or investigation into?
I recognise it, and it's something that we're actively thinking about. How do we do differently? So to this point, 80% of all people, all staff working on the NBIT replacement are contractors. Only 20% are permanent. And of course, when you only get contractors working on things like this, they're by their nature transient, and we keep information and skills, and they're generally expensive, which is why we need to reset the whole programme.
Is this part of the strategy review, or is that a separate issue?
No, it is part of the strategy review. So we need to... Would it be useful if I gave a little bit of my thought in terms of the background to this?
Absolutely.
So the first thing I asked myself is, how did we ever get to a position where we're building a system internally? And from doing some research, going back to 2021, I think there were two decisions that were made that were fundamentally the wrong decision with the benefit of hindsight. One was the objective to get off Horizon, which is different than building a system for the future. And the second one was the decision to build in-house. And I think people in the room will all be, heard the horror stories of people trying to build things in-house. IT systems, particularly if you haven't got all the components in place to do so in the right conditions. So I think, based on my assessment, that this was always set up to fail in the first place. Building the old Horizon system can never be the right thing to do. So what we need to do as part of reset is to think about what do we need to build. And clearly we need to build a system for the future. Now I'm hopeful that much of the technology that's been built to date we can reuse, but we have to build to the outcomes of the strategic review. And to give you an example of that, we need to, for example, build to the bank's requirements and what the banks need rather than just building old technology. So that's what we're going to do.
When is that achievable by?
I don't know today, but I will know soon. So we have a team of people now looking at this, and within the next 2 to 3 months, we'll have a firm view on what we need to build, how we need to build it, how much it's going to cost, and when it will be delivered by.
Are we talking 5 years, 10 years?
No, it'll be. Our objective is to do it. If you think about the prior objective, which was 1.2 billion in 2028, it'll be before 2028, and it won't cost 1.2 billion, and we'll have far more certainty that it will be delivered.
What do you currently see as the main issues with the NBIT system?
The NBIT design?
Yes.
I think the main issue is we're building the old Horizon system, which, the moment that decision was made in 2021, it was out of date because Horizon was, Horizon is out of date. We need to build for the future. That's number one. And I think the main other issue is building it in-house. There must be a better way.
In respect of Horizon as it currently is operated by Fujitsu. Could we please turn to poll 00448864? This is a meeting of the group executive. It's before your time, 13th of March 2024, but we'll see how it leads into a subsequent meeting that you were involved in. If we could please turn to page 6. We have there a section on Fujitsu extension, and it says Simon Oldnell spoke to the paper, which set out the current position on the discussions to date, including with government, on the continuation of support services for the Horizon platform by Fujitsu beyond March 2025, when the current contract was due to end. The extension was proposed to cover the intervening period before rollout of NBIT. While discussions were ongoing, Fujitsu had not yet made any commitment to continuing the support, and against the context of the current external scrutiny was unlikely to do so without the express support of the government. Just pausing there, I know this wasn't a discussion that you were party to. What do you understand by that?
By support of the government?
Yes.
My understanding is that Fujitsu wanted the Department of Business to ask them directly to extend the contract rather than it coming from the post office to ask them to extend the contract. That's my understanding.
And do you know the reasoning behind that at all?
I don't. I can only imagine it might help their discussions in going back to Japan to get approval for this, but I'm speculating.
Subject to the position being settled, funding for the contract extension form part of the SPMP business case. So it looks as though in March 2024, the Post Office was looking to extend the Fujitsu contract beyond March 2025. And I'm going to take you to a board meeting in which you were present. That's poll 00448648. Was this your first board meeting, the 4th of June?
Yes, and I was an observer at this meeting.
If we scroll down, we can see there, it says Nigel Railton opened the meeting. Given the very recent appointment of Nigel Railton, the board agreed that Ben Tidswell preside as chair of the meeting. Could we please turn to page 11? And it's the bottom of page 11, bottom half, Horizon Continuity of Service Update. And there's a discussion there about the future of Fujitsu and Horizon. Simon Oldnell spoke to the paper outlining the proposal for a 5-year exit plan for Fujitsu. And Mr. Oldnell advised the board were being asked to include in the strategy a stage where, if NBIT was not completed within the term of the extension, that the company would put in place an alternative approach to supporting the Horizon platform to make sure that Fujitsu was still able to exit at the 5-year point. SJ queried what the alternative approach would constitute. SO advised that the Horizon platform could be brought in-house or procurement undertaken for external support for the platform. Mr. Oldnell estimated that it would be 18 months to 2 years when a decision would need to be taken on this point. So, as at your first board meeting, it appears that there was discussion about maintaining Horizon beyond the contracted date, but either bringing it in-house or having another firm support Horizon. Is that a correct summary of that?
Yeah, well, I think the extension of Fujitsu for up to 5 years had been the conversation that had been ongoing for a while. And to be clear, an extension of Fujitsu is absolutely necessary to keep going. I'm not sure whether the conversation was about an extension beyond the 5 years or not, but certainly at the same meeting, a conversation about potentially bringing elements of the Horizon platform in-house, I recall, was discussed.
Mr. Jacobs queried whether we should not be working queried whether we not be working towards this scenario. CB advised that a high-level plan and cost to execute had been prepared. However, the team did not want to go down that path at present, given the commitment Fujitsu were requesting. And here we have you querying whether there were any termination points in the proposed extension, and Mr. Oldnall replied that they were not, and CB contributed that there were core services that would be provided for the entire term. However, there were certain services that could be terminated. Can you assist us with that discussion?
Yes, I was just, I found it surprising that we were committing to a 5-year contract when our objective on the old plan was to be on our own system by 2028. So I was just questioning whether or not break clauses needed to be in the contract to allow us flexibility.
We then have an action point. You queried the maximum cost for the contract extension. SO replied and advised that he would check the costs if all services aside from the core services were removed. I think that's Mr. Ismail queried why the extension was not proposed for 3 years, given the programme build was tracking to complete in 2026. CB advised this was proposed in order to provide some contingency. Mr. Ismail tested this further and pointed out the risk of the company being on a new platform, yet still paying service fees to Fujitsu. CB reiterated the point in respect of seeking a contingency. We then have over the page, you again querying whether you can negotiate a break clause. So that's the point I think you've just raised.
Yes.
Mr. Woodley advising that the team could take this away and look at a 5-year extension with a 3-year break. Mr. Ismail noted the communications on the extension needed to be executed with precision in relation to postmasters and the public. CB advised that he understood this. And then we have action. Mr. Railton, so yourself, asked for a session with SO to discuss what owning the source code encompassed. Can you assist us with what's meant by owning the source code and the discussion that took place there?
Yes, I think that perhaps owning the source code is perhaps not the best description of the conversation that we were going to have. It was really trying to understand what the team actually meant by insourcing Fujitsu, because that can mean many things. And I was a little confused, so I was trying to understand there what that actually meant in practice. Was it all of the source code? Was it all of the system? Was it all of the processes? That's really what that was relating to.
And is there a possibility that at some point after the conclusion of the contract with Fujitsu and before the NBIT system, somehow the post office will be taking responsibility for the Horizon system itself?
I think, well, it's a possibility, yes. But we have to extend the contract. We have no choice. We need optionality to be able to get out of the Fujitsu agreement at the appropriate time for both parties. We are looking at all options in terms of how to bring effectively the functionality that we currently have by using the Fujitsu system within our control. So I think the wrong description is bring it in-house. I think perhaps a better description is developing something that we can use ourselves.
And what's the difference between those two descriptions? Sorry.
Well, just bringing Fujitsu in-house just suggests we're going to take everything that Fujitsu do in terms of processes, data center, and everything, and just bring it in-house and basically manage what they do now. What we're looking at is a blend to say, look, are there some things that Fujitsu do today that make sense to continue, and we don't have to change? I think an example I'd give is, the interfaces we have with the banks, for example, and they work. Currently, there'd be no point in rebuilding those. So that's something we might keep. Equally, we might want to change some of the infrastructure or, some of the transaction processing elements of it.
We have, if we scroll down, the board resolved, subject to seeking a 3-year break provision, the proposed strategy for an extension of up to 5 years of the Horizon support contract from Fujitsu from 1st of April 2025 until the 31st of March 2030 is hereby approved, and the inclusion of a binding commitment to Fujitsu that an alternative approach to supporting the Horizon platform through commencement of a programme to insource or reprocure elements be activated if there is not sufficient time within the term extension to fully migrate from Horizon to NBIT and is hereby approved. Can you assist us with what the present position is in relation to that?
The conversations with Fujitsu are ongoing.
We've seen in the YouGov report, for example, and in evidence that the inquiry has heard, of issues still being experienced by sub-postmasters in relation to their use of Horizon. is it possible, is it likely that sub-postmasters are going to be using that same system into 2030?
It is possible. I don't think it's likely. And certainly our intention and the intention of the new team is to move away from Horizon to a new system that can deliver, I'm sorry to go back to the strategic review, but a system that's fit for the future as soon as possible, but to do that in a way that doesn't disrupt postmasters' activities.
Thank you. So that might be an appropriate time to take our mid-afternoon break.
Yeah.
Could we come back at 25 to, please? Mr. Railton, we spoke before the break about Horizon potentially continuing for another 5 or potentially even more years, and also the possibility that certain aspects may come in-house. What do you envisage insofar as prosecution support in those circumstances?
From Fujitsu?
From Fujitsu, yes.
I don't know.
Have you seen the recent correspondence between Mr. Reid and Fujitsu regarding their involvement in prosecution support?
I was provided with some documentation, I think, on Thursday,
Yes.
which was an exchange between Nick Reid and Fujitsu from this year. That's the correspondence you're...
It is. Is
Yes,
that
I've
something
seen
that had been drawn to your attention before this Thursday?
Not particularly. Clearly, I inquired when I received the documentation, and my understanding is it's information that's required by the Met Police and the City of London Police into an investigation that involves organised crime, and that's why they approached us. And the Post Office, we went to Fujitsu and asked them as well to help provide this data. But that's as far as I am aware of the situation.
Perhaps we can bring on to screen some of the correspondence. I won't take you to all of it because we have dealt with it with other witnesses, but could we please turn to FUJ 002 43204? This is the letter from Fujitsu from Mr. Patterson to Nick Reid. If we scroll down, there's a reference there to Mr. Bartlett's letter or email, and that's a document that we've seen and a document that was also in your pack. And it says, Mr. Bartlett suggests that a failure to provide a witness statement would rightly be interpreted by the police and prosecutors as the Post Office and Fujitsu not having faith in the reliability of the data, with the obvious outcome resulting. Mr. Patterson says, a witness statement from Fujitsu attesting to the reliability of the Horizon system and of data from it in criminal proceedings would amount to expert opinion evidence. Fujitsu is incapable of providing expert opinion evidence as it is neither independent nor has it sufficient information to provide such an opinion. As the Post Office is well aware, there have been and there continue to be bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon system. Further, Fujitsu currently has and previously had access to branch transaction records. Your letter also acknowledges the existence of other matters beyond the Horizon system which could have operated to create innocent discrepancies in branch accounts, including miskeys or omissions when remitting cash or stamp stock based on Horizon data by end users. He then continues to say that the Horizon system is reliant on the delivery of services by Post Office and third parties. Over the page, please. Based on the evidence which has been seen and heard in the inquiry, Fujitsu considers that all of the matters mentioned above would need to be investigated carefully by the Post Office and the police with the assistance of an independent technical IT expert and possibly also a forensic accounting expert to ascertain proper explanations for branch account discrepancies. Fujitsu considers that only after such an investigation has been undertaken could a meaningful expert witness statement be made in subsequent criminal proceedings which addresses the reliability of the Horizon system and the relevant data produced. For the reasons I've mentioned above, Fujitsu cannot provide such a statement. As for your comments regarding the pursuit of shortfalls, Fujitsu will continue to deliver its contractual obligations, including reporting promptly and transparently branch impacting incidents. It is for the Post Office to work with postmasters to understand and resolve branch account discrepancies fairly and promptly. The improvements you mention to your discrepancy investigations process, I hope, will allow for this to happen. You say in your letter that Horizon data is not currently being used for civil recoveries from postmasters. This is reassuring. For the avoidance of doubt, Fujitsu will not support the Post Office in the event it pursues civil recoveries from postmasters. Do you understand from this and from the discussions that you have had that the current position is that Fujitsu will not provide a witness statement for criminal prosecutions, even if requested to do so by the police? I'm not sure that's entirely correct. I understand that they will provide it if the police ask them. That's my understanding of the situation. I do find some of the comments made by Fujitsu here quite strange, actually, given that we and postmasters rely on the system. We have a system of controls to give us all comfort that things are working with integrity. But I am speaking to Paul on Thursday, so I will test this with him. And in respect of not supporting the Post Office in the event it pursues civil recoveries, is that your understanding, that that is the current position?
I think so.
We can see a response from Mr. Woodley, that's FUJ 002432209. Mr. Woodley responds to that correspondence. If we scroll over the page, he explains in that paragraph there, the final section of the first paragraph, he says, the feedback they received in April 2024 was that the police had only been able to have one conversation with Fujitsu at the time, and the investigation officer's impression from that conversation was that they were indirectly being told by Fujitsu that the Horizon system was unreliable. As a result, the police told the AC&I team that the investigation could not progress. Over the page, I'm just going to read to you a few relevant passages. It says at the top of that page, to get the right checks and balances, this is under the heading criminal investigations and prosecutions. Right. To get the right checks and balances in any of these investigation processes, data will be required from the Horizon system, along with analysis of any known bugs, defects, or errors in the system at the relevant time period. Thank you for confirming that such data will be provided in line with contractual obligations and in cooperation with law enforcement agencies. It then addresses the postmaster shortfalls, and Mr. Woodley, in the final sentence of that first paragraph, says, I was concerned about your statement that Fujitsu would not support the Post Office in the event that it pursues civil recoveries from postmasters. While Post Office does not currently take civil recoveries action to recover established losses from postmasters, this may be necessary in future to establish a fair, transparent and consistent approach to recoveries. Critically, this would only be undertaken in future with the wide endorsement of the postmaster community and robust independent assurance. Before I ask you about this, I'd just like to turn to the response from Mr. Patterson. That's at FUJ 002432211. In the second, we've seen this letter, so I won't go over the first paragraph, but in the second paragraph he says, I do not intend to engage further with the Post Office on the matters I raised. We completely trust in Sir Win and the inquiry process, which will examine the extent of the Post Office change in Phase 7. You will recall that I have stated publicly Fujitsu does not wish to extend the contract with the Post Office, and your letter has reinforced the challenges we have as an organisation with continuing to do business with the Post Office. As agreed some months ago with Nick, we wish to continue to prioritise the necessary work on exit, and the Post Office has hired an external person who starts in August to take responsibility for this. While there have been several workshops to scope out the 5-year request, your statement when we met regarding a 2-year request, needs rapid attention from the Post Office. Dan Walton has arranged an initial meeting with Neil on the 25th of July to address his technical questions, and there's a workshop with other Post Office personnel to update Dan on the 2-year requirements. Is there, in your view, a impasse between the Post Office and Fujitsu currently?
I think when I step back and read this correspondence, there's certainly a breakdown in the relationship. I think that's evident. I think there has been an impasse, but I'm hopeful now that we can break through that impasse with Neil Brocklehurst, as I say, who's now the acting CEO, working with Paul Patterson at Fujitsu to now break this and try and come up with something that's sensible for Fujitsu and sensible for the Post Office and postmasters, because we have to continue with the system post-March. We have no choice.
And what is your view, having seen this correspondence,
My view on
of the nature of the relationship between Fujitsu and the Post Office?
I think it's strained.
What's your view on the approach by Fujitsu as set out in this letter?
I think it's quite defensive. I think they're clearly making statements for the benefit, I think, of this inquiry, perhaps. I don't know, I'm not close to it, but I also understand from others that Paul is a very reasonable guy and Fujitsu are very reasonable as a company, and I'm hopeful that with the right conversations we can find something that works for both organisations.
If you move away from Fujitsu in the way that we've already discussed today, prior to the start of NBIT, to some extent, what is the plan for assisting the police or assisting in civil recoveries?
I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid, but clearly we would, any design that we have for the use of the Fujitsu system or components of it or NBIT, we'll have to make sure that we can comply with our legal obligations to provide data and information as required.
Because there's going to be a number of years, possibly 5, possibly more, in which the Horizon system is still going to be used. How do you see the Post Office as overcoming issues and being able to provide evidence to criminal prosecutions and undertake civil recoveries?
Well, I think on the first element of the question, our intention is not to stay on Fujitsu for another 5 years, and certainly not beyond. And I think our objective is to move away from the Fujitsu system as soon as reasonably possible, and put in place the right system for the future. I need to go away and consider this more. There's quite a lot to consider here, but we will, as an organisation, make sure we comply with the requests from the police, particularly on things such as we've discussed this afternoon about the issues that have been raised from the City of London and the Met Police. I think what we need to do is come up to a sensible compromise and sensible solution. We're working with Fujitsu, and I'm confident we can.
I'm seeing this at the moment very much with a criminal lawyer's hat on, all right?
Yes.
As opposed to the relationships between you and Fujitsu. But there are two possible scenarios that I just want to ask you to consider with me. The first is that completely independently of the Post Office, the police obtain information which suggests that a crime has been committed against the Post Office, and we'll say it's a financial crime of some sort.
Yes.
Which will require financial investigation, right?
Yes.
And so they come to the Post Office and say, we have this information, we want to investigate, this is what we want from you. In my mind, the answer is obvious. Here it is.
Agreed.
Right. Because you are currently not in the business of prosecuting anyone.
That's right.
That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct, and the Post Office will no longer prosecute ever again anybody.
So it's simply a question, not a question, it's simply the Post Office being asked to cooperate with the police investigation. And I would have thought the answer would always be yes.
Absolutely.
Right. The second scenario is that you, the Post Office, come into possession of information which suggests that a crime has been committed against the post office. Forget whether it's a postmaster or any other person, but against you have the initial information. My understanding so far is that in those circumstances, your own investigation department would investigate whether or not such an offence may have been committed.
I think that's a start point.
Yeah,
my
sure,
understanding.
right. And then they would get to the point where they would, for these purposes, conclude that there is evidence to support an allegation of a crime.
In theory, yes.
Now, my understanding, and this is what I want your confirmation about, is this, that at that point, it would actually be a board decision as to whether or not a report was made to the police of that suspicion, in effect.
That is correct, and I know
That's your understanding as well.
No, yeah, it is my understanding, and I think
Yeah.
it's correct.
And
I think
it's
there was some
correct.
debate about whether or not this moved away from the board, from correspondence I read.
Exactly so. So I've got it right. So let us assume that the board says yes. On the basis of what you tell us, we think they should be reported to the police.
Yes.
Thereafter, as I see it as a criminal lawyer, the process becomes identical to scenario number one. The police become the investigators, and you simply cooperate with whatever they ask you for.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Now, you are not Fujitsu, but can you think of any reason why any company which is asked for information by the police, short of something being incredibly commercially sensitive or something like that for the moment, but in the normal run of cases, why they wouldn't just say, yes, Detective Inspector Williams, since you've asked me for that information, I'll go and get it and provide it for you.
I find it odd.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Moving on to our final topic, and that's compensation and redress.
Yes.
You have advocated for that work to move to within the Department for Business. How do you envisage that working?
To be clear, I've advocated that the post office don't do redress. Where it goes to is not my decision, but basically my position since I joined was that the post office should not be dealing with redress and payment of compensation for reasons that I think some people don't trust the post office still. I've had conversations with various officials, and those conversations continue. So I don't yet have confirmation that it will move it, but I'm hopeful it will at some point.
One of the complaints about compensation and redress is that it's taking too long. Won't that just slow things down yet further and kick it down the road?
One of my objectives and one of the team's objectives is to speed things up. And I think having two organisations dealing with basically the same thing, but having two organisations cannot be the most effective way of doing something. I also was interested in the conversation this morning about redress and how the team works, and I've spent quite a lot of time with Simon McAlden talking about how we can speed this up. And I think we can automate far more. It's one of my objectives now, again, post my given evidence today, to go back and work with the executive team and see how we can speed things up by automation. I don't know, but I can't understand why everything is so manual. I think there's better ways of doing things.
Can you give us an idea of what you mean by automation in terms of compensation or redress?
Of course. Well, at the moment, and this is my understanding because I haven't been into the kind of real detail on this, but we have a whole bunch of people. I think Karen talked this morning about 110, but I think there's more when you look at the wider team who are manually accessing databases or old database information to look for shortfalls. And that takes time and people. And it's very difficult to scale a process that requires people. And we know that, hopefully we'll have more and more postmasters coming forward with claims. So I think the way to think about scaling it is to automate that process. There must be a way of taking an historic database and writing database queries and programs that can get this information for us very, very quickly so that we can turn these things around much more quickly. So that's my objective. I need to now talk to the team and people actually know how to do this, but at a logical level, that would seem sensible to me.
The final document I'd like to look at this afternoon is Bayes 50793. Maybe 4 zeros. Bayes 40793. This is a briefing for the then Minister Hollenrake in April this year. It's a briefing for his meeting with Nick Reed. But, if we could turn over the page, please. There's a section at the bottom of that page on background that addresses your appointment. It says background. Nigel Railton accepted the role of interim chair following a conversation with the Secretary of State last week. The Secretary of State has previously provided Mr. Railton with her priorities for Post Office, which include 1, intensifying existing work streams to address the Post Office's historic failures, 2, support cultural transformation and improving the Post Office's capacity, capability and resilience at all levels, and 3, enabling the future success of the Post Office, including through effective financial management and delivery of NBIT. First of all, are those still the Secretary of State's priorities, even though we have a new Secretary of State?
Broadly, yes.
Can you assist us with how it has changed?
I think on the intensifying existing work stream to address Pol's historic failures, there's particular reference to speeding up remediation and compensation payments.
Thank you, because that was going to be, in fact, my question, which is where does compensation and remediation fit within those priorities?
Yes, I mean, I think this is a summary, actually, of the, there's a couple of sub-bullets for each one.
Thank you. Have you spoken to the current minister regarding compensation and redress?
I've spoken to the current minister, yes. We talked about a lot of topics, and yes, I did.
What is your view as to whether government is providing the issue of redress and compensation with sufficient attention and support?
I think they are. I've spoken to the minister, I've spoken to the Secretary of State. I've made my position very clear in terms of how I think this needs to evolve, and they've been very supportive.
Thank you. So those are all of my questions. There are some questions from Mr. Jacobs. Do you, sir, have any questions before?
Well, just before you ask your questions, Mr. Jacobs, obviously, Mr. Railton, you've raised the prospect that over the course of the coming weeks, I think, given the way you put your evidence, there would be likely information about your strategic plan, which would be of considerable interest to the inquiry.
Yes.
So we need to work out a mechanism for the inquiry to be kept up to date, effectively. Yeah. And obviously, I know you're the chair, and therefore a very important figure, but if you can't commit to things while you're sitting in the witness box, that's fair enough. But what I'd like to be in a position to get agreement about is that, well, as I see it, the next step is approval or otherwise by the government.
Yes.
So obviously I would like to be informed. Maybe there'll be a great public announcement, so I won't need your assistance. But if there isn't, I would like the Post Office to tell the inquiry what the position is once the government say whatever they're going to say.
Certainly.
And I'll be asking the government to tell me as well, so it won't be just the Post Office. And it may be that that will provoke the need for a Rule 9 request, which I'm sure you know what that is, and a pretty quick answer to it, if the statement isn't obviously self-explanatory. So again, I'd like your cooperation in seeking to ensure that this could happen, because what I don't want to happen is for the Phase 7 hearing to finish more or less on time, as I'm pretty sure it's going to, and and then for events to be occurring while I'm trying to make sense of what I'm going to say.
Yes.
So I'm really asking for your cooperation in feeding the inquiry information as soon as you can,
Yes.
in respect of the strategic plan and all that flows from it. All right?
I can assure you of my cooperation and commitment to do that.
Fine, thank you. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, sir. I ought to say that we've had 20 of our clients asking for me to ask the question that you've just asked, so I don't need to ask it.
Well, I've stolen your thunder, Mr.
Absolutely.
Jacobs, and I apologise.
I'm afraid my voice isn't very great, so if you can't hear me or understand me, then let me know.
I can certainly hear you.
Good. So thank you. In relation to the plan, the strategic review plan, we understand that once the plan was drafted, Post Office didn't go back to the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters or to sub-postmasters to ask them if they were content with the proposed plan, whether they objected to proposals or had proposals that they wanted to be included. Why didn't Post Office ask for feedback or properly consult sub-postmasters on
I
this?
think we did consult with sub-postmasters and the various federations and groups to get their input to the plan.
Yes.
So we got their input. We talked to lots and lots of people to get their input. And I think I can understand people's concerns, but I doubt there's anything in the plan that when we announce it, people will not want us to do or not be happy with.
Don't you think you should have sent the plan at least to the Federation and asked for feedback on the proposals or any counter proposals as a consultation, part of consultation exercise?
Perhaps, but perhaps at that stage we can do that once the government agree to the fact that this is a plan that's sensible. We can then consult with them at that point before we implement it. So,
thank you. I want to ask you now about restorative justice. In your statement at paragraph 56, you say you believe that you met postmasters recently on the 18th of June.
And subsequently.
And we've heard evidence from Ms McEwen today that such meetings have been profound and impactful. Is that how you found your meetings?
I found them, yes, really, really helpful.
And you say that a new deal and full engagement with postmasters is fundamental, and that's how you would like to see things going forward.
Yes.
Can you confirm whether the new deal, which I understand is part of the strategic review, whether that incorporates any wider restorative justice proposals for sub-postmasters?
It doesn't really deal with compensation. It deals with a new economic model and new ways of working going forward.
Okay, I'll expand on that. Of course, you've only been around in office since May of this year.
Yes.
In December 2022, Howe & Co, who instruct me, set out some proposals for wider restorative justice in written submissions, and Mr. Steen, King's Counsel, raised them at a hearing on the 8th of December 2022. And I just want to ask you whether, as chair, you're aware of whether there are any proposals for any ongoing psychiatric and counselling support for sub-postmasters and their families.
I'm afraid I'm not aware. I'm not aware of that.
What about bursaries to assist with retraining of sub-postmasters and for the education of their children, whose education was disrupted by the scandal?
I'm afraid I'm not able to answer that question. All I will say is I believe that the remediation process and compensation is being widened.
What about a tangible memorial scheme to mark the miscarriage of justice and sympathetically record the experiences of sub-postmasters?
I'm sorry, I'm really not familiar with this at all.
Okay, well, and finally, are there any proposals for local initiatives to restore the reputation of sub-postmasters within their local communities?
I think there's certainly an objective to restore the Post Office brand. How far that stretches to local, I don't know at this point.
The proposals that I've just listed out were put to this inquiry in submissions in December 2022. Do you accept that the plan that you speak about in your statement, the New Deal for postmasters, should include such measures? As a matter of principle, Mr. Railton.
I think as a matter of principles, yes, but I think I just need to think about it. In principle, yes. In practice, how would that work?
And is that something that you are prepared to consider going forward? Or the Post Office is prepared to consider?
Well, the Post Office, I'm sure, should consider that, yes.
Moving on, I want to ask you about the standard sub-postmaster's contract.
Yes.
And perhaps if we could just have part of that on the screen. So it's POL 00000, that's 5 zeros and then 254. And going to page 32 of that document, that's section 12 of the standard sub-postmaster's contract. And page 32. So if we could then scroll down to paragraph 20. Nearly there. Do you see paragraph 20 now? Post Office duties.
Yes.
And Post Office Limited shall. And then if we scroll down to 20.3, properly and accurately effect, record, maintain and keep records of all transactions effected using Horizon. Now, these are the new terms that have been put into the contracts after the Common Issues judgment of Lord Justice Fraser. And my question for you is, does this mean that the mechanism exists within Post Office now for monitoring and identifying shortfalls on Horizon terminals?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, yes.
So Post Office are able to identify, track down and monitor shortfalls?
Yes, exactly. Yes, and we have a process that does that.
And if we could then move further down to paragraphs 20.4 to 20.7, again, Post Office will properly and accurately produce relevant records and explain transactions and alleged apparent shortfalls attributed to the sub-postmaster, cooperate in seeking to identify the possible or likely causes of apparent or alleged shortfalls and or whether or not there was indeed any shortfall at all, seek to identify the causes of any apparent or alleged shortfalls in any event, and disclose possible causes or apparent or alleged shortfalls and the cause thereof to the sub-postmaster candidly, fully and frankly. I haven't read those too quickly.
No, I've read them.
So these sub-clauses say that the Post Office will seek to identify possible or likely causes of shortfalls. Do you accept then that the Post Office has a facility to do this? It can identify and it can do this?
Yeah, so we have a process with and forgive me, this is my understanding based on information I've been given, but we have a process now where people can put any shortfall into dispute. It then goes into a process that's administered by a team in Chesterfield that looks at what's caused a shortfall. But the proposition of it is that the postmaster is not at fault. That's really important. And that's a start point. And it's up for the process to identify where any shortfall may have been caused. And it may not be Horizon. I think, as mentioned in these clauses, it could be a stock shortfall, that the wrong stock's been sent, a cash shortfall. It could be many reasons. One thing we do want to do is we want to get more postmasters involved in reviewing these processes to make sure that they're comfortable with them.
So the process really is that the postmaster has to identify the shortfall first. It's not a case of Post Office actively looking for problems in the Horizon system.
No, I think that the shortfall will appear on the system, I think, but predominantly through a postmaster logging a dispute.
You were asked by Mr. Blake about the position between Post Office and Fujitsu, and there's a letter. You may not need to turn it up because you've answered on the subject, that Mr. Patterson wrote to the Chief Executive on the 17th of May 2024 to Mr. Reid, and he says in it, to be clear, FSL will not support the Post Office to act against sub-postmasters. We will not provide support for any enforcement actions taken by Post Office against postmasters, whether civil or criminal, for alleged shortfalls, fraud or false accounting. So the position is Post Office are contractually bound to identify and resolve these shortfalls. How can Post Office fulfil these obligations without support from Fujitsu?
I don't know. I mean, that's quite a technical question. I think one of the issues that the Post Office has right now is they don't recover any shortfalls and haven't for quite a period of time. But I think we need to think about how we can get the business back on a proper footing. So I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll certainly take it away and think about it.
Thank you. And finally from me, at about 2:10 this afternoon, Mr. Blake took you to the YouGov survey, so
Yes.
prepared for the request of this inquiry. And we know from Miss Burton's evidence last week that there was a board meeting about this on the 24th of September, is that right?
Yes.
And you were at that meeting, were
Yes.
you? And you will no doubt know then that the executive summary says that 92% of the 1,000 postmasters who responded, approximately 1,000, experienced some form of issue with the Horizon system in the last 12 months, and 98% of those who experienced discrepancies reported shortfalls. And worryingly, the most common resolution was for them to use branch money or resolve it themselves. So isn't it right that the sub-postmasters are still paying for Horizon-generated shortfalls from their own funds? Do you accept that?
Well, that's what the report says, so therefore I have to. I think we need to go away and investigate this again and look at it. As I say, the report was disappointing, surprising, and as I say, we need to go away and work out exactly what is happening again. But that's certainly not the intention of the Post Office for that to happen.
And it follows, doesn't it, that the need to identify and resolve Horizon shortfalls, not least because of your contractual obligations, but also because of what sub-postmasters are experiencing on the ground, is a matter of huge concern today, isn't it, Mr. Railton?
Yes.
And are you able to say what steps you're able to take as interim chair to try and drive this issue forward and resolve it?
Well, we're going to take the survey, and we've already got a lot of activities underway. I think the best way to resolve this, and I'll talk to the acting chief executive about this, is to get a number of postmasters to work with us to review the processes end to end, because we can say repeatedly that we have confidence in the processes, but until they do, then I don't think we're going to resolve this.
Well, thank you. Your answers have been helpful. I'm just going to ask if I need to ask you anything more. No, I haven't any further questions.
Thank you for the questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think those are all the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Railton, for your witness statement and for your evidence this afternoon. I'm very grateful to you, and grateful too that I may hear from you further, so to speak.
Thank you.
Mr. Chapman isn't here, is he, from the department?
No.
And I take it, so that I'm not going off on a false trail, it's the Department of Business, Trade and Business that...
Yes.
Yeah, fine. So is anyone here from the department? Anyway, if they are following remotely, they will know that I would expect the same cooperation from them as I've been assured I'll get from Mr. Railton. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
$10 o'clock tomorrow morning.